All right. Um, and, and of course now I having problems with my screen sharing. So we're just going to stop and start that again. Okay, so I think that should be working now. And we're recording. I'll just also let everybody know that I am just returning to the office after being away for like 2.5 weeks dealing with some family stuff. So I might be a little bit rusty with this. Hopefully it's all clear. And anyway, so we'll get started. And the presentation is going to briefly go through the draft municipal plan, how it connects to the public feedback we've heard, things like that. So what is a municipal plan? It's basically the 10+ year framework and policy for land use and anything that relates to land use. So it's pretty broad, includes municipal bylaws, budgets, land, infrastructure, facilities, services, grants, and programs. Doesn't require council to do anything, but council can't do anything to contravene the policies in the municipal plan. The reason why this is happening now is local governance reform. Bayside and Shamcook are now part of St. Andrews, and their rural plans are quite out of date. So when we do new plans, it has to be now for the entire municipality. But it is also a good opportunity to, it's kind of the first big project, including lots of public input of the new municipality. So it's a big opportunity as well. So it's authorized under the Community Planning Act, an act of the province of New Brunswick. And one of the first steps of the process of creating the municipal plan was doing a background study. That can be found on the town's website. And it covers geography, economy, finances, and any kind of direction we got from council. So I'll talk about the public feedback we heard through that. This is kind of the second round of public feedback on the municipal plan and the overall process. The first round was back almost a year ago, last fall, when we had kind of released the background study. So we wanted to make sure we were covering the right things and are basically the things that we had researched were correct and that we're heading in the right direction. Just a quick overview of the current bylaws and how these will be simplified. So in Bayside, there's the Bayside Rural Plan from 2009, St. Croix Corridor South Rural Plan, fairly recent, 2021, and the town subdivision bylaw did come into effect in 2023, covering the whole municipality. Shamcook, fairly similar, an older rural plan from 2011. Slightly different than the Bayside Rural Plan. I can't tell you why that is, but they seem very similar with some differences. And finally, in the former municipal boundaries of St. Andrews, there was a municipal plan in 2020, zoning bylaw that was most recently updated in 2022, although there's been a bunch of amendments since then. Secondary municipal plan and that same subdivision bylaw. So we've had about 5 years to work with that municipal plan and see how it could maybe be a little bit more targeted and maybe a little bit more effective. So as I said before, we got a lot of really good feedback through the background study process. We did surveys, we did community meetings. And what we really heard, and these kind of have become the overall goals or objectives of the proposed municipal plan. Continued delivery of high quality public services and infrastructure, protection and conservation of the physical environment, including protection of the Shamcook Lake drinking watershed, mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change, including erosion and sea level rise, developing housing that meets the needs of all residents, specifically housing that is affordable, preservation of rural way of life and rural economic development, including promotion of local agriculture, tourism that supports local residents and businesses without straining resources, maintaining the historically significant character of the St. Andrews area. So the next set of slides, really the rest of the presentation, after this one on the overall concept, will be touching on each of those points and how the plan deals with that through policies. We're not going to hit everything. It's we tried to make it as simple and targeted and as effective as possible, but it's still about a 43-page document. So again, you can find all this information on the town's website, and I encourage you to review it more closely and send in any feedback you have. So the overall concept of the plan is really to base it as much as possible on data, including historical development, existing geography, infrastructure, and future trends. So future trends, we look at census, we see where things are going. We do our best to predict the future and say, it looks like, well, St. Andrews is going to grow a lot, and how will land use need to change, and how will other policies need to change to be able to accommodate that growth sustainably. We also look at the previous work that's been done in terms of regulations. So we do have those rural plans, municipal plan, things like that. There's also provincial regulations that we have to make sure these plans conform with. So that includes the Community Planning Act and something kind of new, statements of public interest under the Community Planning Act. So there are these broad policy directions from the province that we have to make sure that this plan meets. And I already talked about the public input. So the background study has been really important, and getting some of that kind of initial, more general stuff. Now we're targeting in on the municipal plan, and we've gotten some good feedback already. And then once that becomes a little bit more solidified and it seems like we have a clear direction, we'll start moving on to the zoning bylaw, which is where a lot of these things get really operationalized. You get to start seeing the impacts on a property by property basis. There's a little bit of, I guess, foreshadowing of the zoning bylaw in the municipal plan. And hopefully you can see on the right here, there's kind of a diagram. It talks about conservation zones, rural zones, urban zones, and industrial zones. And these are all kind of moving up in intensity of use of what would be allowed. So conservation zones would be mostly focused on conservation, not a lot of development allowed. Rural zones, you get into a little bit more. Again, you're basing it off of public road capacity. There might be, the further away you get from public roads, it might have different kind of implications for the type of development that could happen there. And then urban zones are going to be likely more high intensity, although of a different character. Certain large scale uses would be more of a rural thing, like forestry. And then industrial zones, that's where you kind of might get emitting industries and things like that. And you can definitely see a lot of where that kind of might start to happen in the zoning bylaw through the municipal plan. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but that's the overall concept. I've been in presentations before where I get like halfway through and all of a sudden nobody could hear me. So I'm just going to quickly I happen to know Rebecca through PAC. So Rebecca, I'm allowing you to speak. Can you just confirm that everything is working on my end?
Yes, hearing you loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'll continue on with the presentation. That is great. So that first point that we got from the public feedback through the background study, continued delivery of high quality public services and infrastructure. The good news is the town already applies long-term asset management planning. So this municipal plan is kind of highlighting that and emphasizing land use decisions should really be connected to that asset management plan and the infrastructure that it's dealing with. And that directs development to the already serviced areas within the urban service boundary. And if there's going to be extensions of those services, it should be for clear public benefit. In the rural areas, that's going to look a little bit more like what is the road capacity and typology. But in new subdivisions in anywhere in the municipality, kind of trying to make sure that if new roads are developed, they're suitable to the type of development that's taking place on them. There's also a lot of recreational space in the municipality, and the municipal plan speaks to preserving that. Again, I'm not going to cover every single policy here. This is just high level, so we can have a discussion. But again, please, review the plan, write into council if you have any more feedback. Okay, so protection and conservation of the physical environment, including protection of the Shamcook Lake drinking watershed. So the town of St. Andrews, where there's municipal water supply that comes from the Shamcook Lake watershed. There's specifically from the lake itself is where the water comes from. So it's very, very important that this area, as well as other wetlands, wetlands are very important for well recharge in rural areas, and they have all sorts of other ecosystem benefits. So conservation is a very important part of this plan. A large land area, especially that around Shamcook Lake, would be designated as a conservation area with conservation zones coming from that. There would be some that are very restrictive, like directly around the lake, directly along coastlines, some that are a little bit less restrictive for things like Minister's Island, Navy Island, things like that. And there are other provincial acts and regulations that have conservation standards in them. There's already protections around Shamcook Lake under the Clean Water Act. So this is kind of aligning with those, whereas some of the previous rural plans were very vague, and kind of left it up to that. Kind of along the same lines as conservation is mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change, including erosion and sea level rise in a coastal community like St. Andrews. We've just in the last few years, we've seen these impacts very clearly. And it is definitely best practices now to have zones specifically for future high tide areas, future flood zone areas, and restrict development within those. Also, kind of going back to the asset management piece, identifying and prioritizing infrastructure at risk. When you have new subdivisions, we now need to always be thinking about emergency evacuation. So really long cul-de-sacs that only have one way in or out. Those can be very problematic in the cases of forest fires or flooding or anything else that requires emergency evacuation. And the one piece here that's really talking about mitigating is where possible. The more efficient, the more mixed use, the more people have the option to walk, cycle, use other non-vehicular transportation, that land use can encourage that. So housing, something big issue all over the country. I guess even Western world right now. Um, so being very flexible is one of the best ways to get the needed housing. So permitting a broad range of residential mixed use housing, um, prioritizing affordable housing based on data. Over the last 5 years, there's been a big development in the type of data that's available for determining what affordability means. These discussions have come a long way. So we can really target and say if council is going to support any type of housing, here's how they should support it, here's what they should require of it. And then kind of on the land use side, if there's going to be more intense development, residential development in the rural areas, making sure it's along existing public roads. So you can kind of see in the map here, there's the more orange areas in the rural parts. That's kind of where large new subdivisions would go, and the yellow areas where you don't have those public roads, that public road access, that's a less intense, maybe one or two lot subdivision, still making sure that well and septic distances can be maintained for public health and safety. Um, Another goal is to preserve the rural way of life and rural economic development, including promotion of local agriculture. So we now have, I guess, more typologies of existing land use and existing capacity of land in one overall plan. So it actually becomes more important to really identify and protect um, viable farm and pasture lands. There's now much more of that within the municipality. Um, Zone for that appropriately. So make sure those uses are allowed. Make sure there are standards to ensure that livestock are not going to cause public health and safety issues for wells. So manure piles, things like that, have setback distances. um, it can get very complicated to have a lot of residential development in these areas, and over time you will lose farmland even if there's just residential development around it. So making sure that these prime agriculture areas are limited in terms of how they can be subdivided as well, and that will lead to less land use conflicts in the future. These areas would also be able to be used for forestry, conservation, things like that. But it's one of the unique things about especially Bayside in Charlotte County is that there's still several viable farms there that operate commercially. So there's an opportunity that you don't want to lose. Tourism that supports local residents and businesses without straining resources. One of the big issues in the municipality is parking. Gets very busy in the summer, as we all know. And while the plan does speak to active transportation, kind of, the mixed uses, sustainable land use patterns, doing as much as possible to reduce the need for vehicular traffic. There's still, I think, not enough parking in town, especially public parking. And so the municipality is looking at creating some public parking lots. Short-term rentals are another, I think, I don't want to say perpetual issue, but the town did explore a bylaw to regulate those specifically a few years ago. It does continually come up with this type of municipal plan and maybe a future zoning bylaw, limiting those to secondary uses outside of higher intensity zones. So making sure that there is kind of a usual residential purpose happening. And so you don't get these issues of ghost hotels. There's more on-site supervision, things like that. So there's less of an impact, but there is still a reasonable ability of people to rent their homes out, as is the case now. The heritage conservation bylaw is now in effect, and one of the impetuses for that bylaw was to preserve character defining elements of many of the historic buildings in town, which certainly are part of the reason why people come to visit. A nice carrot to add to that kind of stick approach is a grant program, facade improvement, things like that. And so that's something the municipality could explore. And finally, and this is something that was in the last municipal plan, promoting shoulder season and winter tourism. So we are seeing more, I think, Oktoberfest is coming up this weekend. I guess we're already in fall, even though it doesn't feel like it. Um, and I think when we look over the years, we are seeing more and more visits happening in, April, May, October, November. Indulge, those kinds of things are really, really helpful. And the more tourism can be spread out through the year, while understanding that it is going to be obviously a bigger thing in summer. That's a really good thing for the overall community in terms of employment, in terms of new businesses being able to open, that serve everyone year round. I think that's something we've seen a little bit more of recently, and that would be great to continue. This is the kind of last goal slide. We're almost at the end of the presentation. So the last goal is to maintain the historically significant character of the St. Andrews area. That includes indigenous culture as well as settler colonial culture. There's a lot more municipality, a lot more sites, a lot more history now to think about. There is still the kind of town plat that has been named, preserved, heritage bylaw, second municipal plan. It's gotten a lot of attention, still gets attention. But again, there's more opportunities. I talked about the heritage bylaw potential grant program already. Where there are pedestrian scale businesses, things that really people can and should be walking to, those should be located in the historic business district. If there's going to be expansion of business areas outside of that, those should really be more for car oriented businesses, so that those kinds of pedestrian oriented businesses don't get pulled out of the downtown, and over time you lose that, having a grocery store that isn't downtown, that will make a big difference over time. So encouraging those businesses to still be there. Another thing we've heard very clearly from council is they want to be in control of new development that happens in the historic business district. If there are significant changes to buildings, if the shape is changing, they're getting taller, things like that, that would all go back to council. That's the proposal at this point. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, please go to the town's website. I think all materials are there. There are maps. I hope Mr. Spear has put up a virtual map that we have, so you can look at things more closely. If you have overall feedback, concerns, or support for the plan, you can write to council through info@townofstandrews.ca. If you have really specific questions, I'm probably the best person to get in touch with, and my contact information is there. This is the last scheduled public information / feedback session, but council still definitely wants to hear from folks. I guess the formal adoption process did start with the public presentation that happened last month, but there's no readings have happened. We still need the public hearing of objections. We're going to, I think have some drafts of the zoning bylaw before we start that, so that people can see how they really work together. And if we're going to be making changes to the zoning bylaw that require changes to the municipal plan, we haven't gotten too far down this process yet. So for me, the next steps are going to be compiling feedback, talking to council about that, seeing what changes we would make, and then looking at the zoning bylaw. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop sharing, and what I will do, we have 6 people here, so I think we have time. Basically, I'll unmute everybody. You can speak, you can give feedback, questions, anything like that, and I'll respond. If you don't want to say anything, you don't have to. That's fine. You can just not unmute yourself. And I guess one other option, I think we also have the Q&A. If you'd rather type your question or anything in, you're welcome to do that as well. So I'm just going to go in order here. Rebecca, you happen to be first, so I'm going to unmute, or you can unmute yourself, and anything you'd like to say, go for it.
Standard. I think it looks, comprehensive as you'd hope. I'm just wondering about the timing of the zoning bylaw that would follow this process.
So I can't exactly say yet. I mean, there's some kind of behind the scenes work. You can see how the municipal plan is pointing to some zones and laying out some of the potential land uses in those zones. I think maybe best case scenario is this feedback filters through. We have some conversations with council over the next month, and maybe some of the zoning drafts can get out to the public in October, and then we can get some feedback on that, see if we need to make changes to the municipal plan. But I think maybe October, in a best case scenario.
Well, that's pretty soon. Thank you.
Great.
That's it for me.
Awesome. And so I'll move to Abigail. So Abigail, I will allow you to talk. You can unmute yourself if you
Great,
want.
thank you. I don't have any comments. This is really just a listening and learning session for me, but thank you.
Okay, great. And I think I'll just say, once I have promoted you or allowed you to speak, you can continue to speak. So if you could just make sure you're muted, and we keep crosstalk to a minimum, that really helps with this process. So Brian, I have promoted you, so if you want to unmute and say anything, you're welcome to.
Thanks, Andrew. Very good presentation. Two questions, I guess. One is, with the new zoning bylaws, which I understand you're kind of working to a process where the zoning bylaws and the municipal plan will be developed in parallel. Is it your expectation that the definitions of the zones will be as fulsome as they were in the previous plan? Because they're fairly general here, but quite specific in the previous one. And I know there are more zoning categories, but is the
Yeah,
expectation that the definition will be fairly comprehensive?
I think so I think definitions will be comprehensive. I think so it's a little bit different depending on if it was a rural plan or if it was under the zoning bylaw. I think you're speaking specifically to the zoning bylaw. Some of those we see, like in the central commercial zone, there's 36 different allowed uses. And so that does make it a little bit complicated and unwieldy. So I think you'll definitely see more specificity in the zoning bylaw than in the municipal plan. Whether it will be as specific as saying, you know, a bike shop is allowed in the central commercial zone versus general retail, that I think is a potential change. One thing that we will do once that stuff is kind of more public, we'll put together a chart that shows here's what was allowed in the old zoning bylaw, here's what would be allowed in the new zoning bylaw, so people can really compare and get a sense of that.
Yeah, that would be a big help. The other related to that too, Xander, is the process for council to change zoning. It sounds as if what's envisaged in the new plan is that that should be a pretty simple process and something that's just done by council. I'm wondering if you're anticipating that there would be requirement for some form of public input, some form of involvement of the planners, if there's if the council decides or anticipates some change to a zoning bylaw.
Yeah,
So not a
yeah, I
zoning
can
bylaw,
definitely.
but rezoning a territory.
Yeah, yeah. So rezonings and variances even to zoning bylaws are there's a process outlined in the Community Planning Act for both of those things, and both of them do require specific rezonings, even amendments to municipal plans. They require they do require public hearings, public notification. Somebody like myself writes reports, goes to council, so that process wouldn't change, and that's the current process. And that's not something that the municipality can change. That's the province is saying you have to do these things.
Okay. Because it was certainly an issue in the last go round on the parking lot proposal for the end of Water Street, where the town felt it could just go ahead and do it, and that it was a permitted use under the zoning bylaw, and there was really no opportunity for any challenge by the planners or any challenge by the residents. It was just, that's what, we've got the authority to do it and we'll do it.
Well, if it is a permitted use under the zoning bylaw, we call permitted use or a by right use, doesn't require conditions, doesn't require variances. Then yes, that's something that a permit just gets issued for. So
Right.
this process is important to kind of you know, when you're kind of changing zoning potentially wholesale. That's a very important time to get as much public feedback as possible to make sure that those future by right uses, you know, people are aware of what could potentially be happening. So if there wouldn't be things like a rezoning.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Right. So moving down the list, Lee, you are next.
Thanks, Xander, for making the presentation and welcome back. I've been at each one of these sessions. I guess I've really committed to them. In each one I've raised a different topic that I think is something that should be looked at. This one is on heritage. Our current municipal plan devotes over a page to an objective, policies, and proposals specifically to retain and enhance the town's heritage structures and the historic business district for the long term. The new plan has none. With no municipal plan commitment to the historic architecture of the downtown, there won't be a legal basis for including the historic business district requirements in a zoning bylaw or secondary municipal plan in the next 10 years. We could lose much of our iconic downtown streetscape in that time. Also, for all its heritage recognition, St. Andrews has the most minimal heritage bylaw in the province. I hope the town won't rest on the limited recognition it gives to less than a third of its heritage buildings, but will look to actively engage others in maintaining and celebrating a greater share of our unique architectural heritage, because where are we without this? Most other communities that have a heritage bylaw have these aspects in it. So I think maybe these were just some inadvertent oversights, but I hope the council might look at these implications and restore a heritage section to the new municipal plan.
Thanks, Lee. And I assume that you've written this into council as well?
I will by the end of the week.
Okay.
I think the end of the week is when we're supposed to have our comments in on the 30-day period.
Yeah, I think, you know, it will go longer, but that's the official period. So, yep.
Yep.
Okay. And the last person I have here is Susan. So, Susan, you're welcome to speak if you'd like.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. One is on page 10, number 1.1.1, number 8 on it. It's the night sky friendly lighting. And I just wondered if we have any in place now and if that is only limited to the downtown core.
So I don't think there's really much in place now. Especially in the rural areas, I don't think there would be anything in terms of regulating lighting. In the current zoning bylaw in the town, I don't think there's much, if there's anything. And this is kind of in response, we have gotten a lot of feedback about the importance of dark skies. There is one section in the zoning bylaw, exterior lighting or illumination devices, any outdoor lighting or illuminated signs basically shouldn't shine light into adjoining properties. So it's pretty vague. Hasn't come up very much.
Okay, so your answer is that currently, to your knowledge, there is no night sky friendly lighting in place.
Oh, is there sorry, I was speaking to the regulation of lighting. It's much harder to notice the lighting that is dark sky friendly than it is to notice the lighting that isn't. Generally, you'll see shields on top of the lights. And really you would just see the light shining directly down and not kind of glowing up into the air. So I'm sure there's some, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head where it is.
So what I'm really referring to is things such as our streetlights in the downtown core, lighting on things such as the town hall or the wharf.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's
I can,
limit.
Xander, may I just make a comment
Sure,
on
go
that?
for it, Lee.
Okay, yeah. The town has downward facing streetlights. That was a deliberate decision when they replaced their streetlights. The biological station does the same. And those are the only two deliberate ones I'm aware of. I know there are a number of people who have lights that shine into my bedroom at night, which I'd love to see fixed. So I think that's something that could be done more. But there are two deliberate activities, and that's the town with its streetlights and the biological station with its. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. The other thing I'd say too about the wharf, I don't know what requirements under like Transport Canada. There might be navigation requirements for lighting that would supersede municipal bylaws.
Okay, I don't really haven't checked into what the definition of night sky friendly lighting actually is specifically. I had assumed that it would be such things as wattage, you know, how bright the lights are, regardless of how they're positioned. And as far as the street lights on the front street, they aren't specifically downward facing. They illuminate in a very broad area. They illuminate onto the sidewalk and out around, and certainly it extends upwards as well. The lighting is not limited to projecting downward. My bedroom window is above the streetlights, and it definitely projects into my bedroom at night.
I think there might be some distinction between like the lights on Water Street and then the lights that are on the NB Power poles. I think the NB Power ones are really NB Powers. I don't I guess the other thing I would say too is a zoning bylaw and municipal plan. And this is generally for everything. They don't apply retroactively. So if a use was allowed at the time the bylaw was created, and the new bylaw says you can't do it, that use can continue. There's some nuance to that.
Right.
But like if this bylaw was to come into effect and had standards for lighting, it wouldn't mean that all of the lights all of a sudden had to change.
Right.
It
My
would
other
kind of be a
question.
progressive, we'll get there over time.
Okay, another question I have is on page 16, 1.2.1, number 2. It says about if feasibility allows. What determines feasibility? I don't know what that really,
So in
how
a
that,
municipal plan, it's pretty vague.
yeah,
It really would be, you know, a question for council. Could be at the staff level. Staff says, yes, this is feasible. No, it isn't. In some cases, it requires further studies. Could be engineering. Trying to see what this is. This is preserving public access to the shoreline. You know, again, you might have structures that have to be there. The end of streets, most cases they're public, but some cases they might not be. So it's a bit open-ended.
my third question is, also on page 16, 1.2.2, it says that they want to limit motorized watercraft on Shamcook. Is it not already limited? And what more do they want to do? What does that mean, limiting motorized watercraft?
So it is already limited, certain types of engines. I don't know the exact number, but I think only under a certain class of engine can be used. That's under the
9.94 stroke.
yeah. So I think basically it's just a line with the provincial regulations. And you know, don't have town events that are let's have all the big boats come out on Shamcook Lake.
So you can't say what the intention is to limit it further than what is already limited?
I think it's to align with what is currently limited.
So they're not suggesting any change to the limits that are currently there?
I don't think there are any plans to do that.
Okay, that answers everything. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So that is everybody. What I'll do is if there's if you would like to speak again, because we've gone through everybody, you can raise your hand. And if nobody has anything else they'd like to say, obviously you can write to council, write to myself. This has been recorded, so we have all the information there as well, all your questions. Kind of waiting in case anybody pops a hand up. Nothing in the Q&A. So I guess thank you everybody for watching and participating in the process. There'll be lots more to come. Lots more opportunities for feedback. But at this time, I'm not seeing anybody else who wants to speak. So I am going to end the presentation. Thank you again.